I'm not sure how I feel about the giant bow thing because it's very dramatic and I thought I liked it, but on camera, I'm not sure I do. Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with the third and final part of my April wrap-up. I will link the other parts down below, as well as links mentioned, content warnings, etc. And let's just get into it. So, the next book that I finished was a big one. That is The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. This was for the read-along that I'm co-hosting, or I'm a guest on, along with Beautifully Bookish Bethany and some other lovely people. I will link our live show down below. Yeah, this is the second book in that trilogy, and I'm not even gonna try to summarize it. I did like this more than the first book. I gave them both 3.5 stars, but I think the first one is probably closer to 3 stars, and this is more of a true 3.5. I'm happy a lot more things are happening, so even though the book is still way longer than it needs to be, it didn't bother me as much because there was more stuff happening. I really like that we spent so much time with Paragon and Amber because they're some of my favorite characters. I continue to find the Rainwild characters and like those sections of the book to be really interesting. We are starting to set up for some interesting plot and character stuff. So like there were things I liked here. I think, and I said this in the live show and in my review as well, I think it's just like the dislikes are piling up for me so much quicker than the likes, that even though I did like things about this book, I don't know, my overall feelings are not super positive. And some of this is like purely personal preference or taste. Like I've mentioned, the Not Like Other Girls vibes from Althea are pretty strong, and that is something where like I recognize that that bothers me way more than it does most people, so keep that in mind. I also personally don't like any of the romantic subplots that are either happening or being set up. There's a couple in particular that I really hate. Brashen is like less annoying to me though than he was earlier, so that is positive. And Rain would be a really great and interesting character if he weren't trying to marry a preteen. And I also am I personally really don't like the way that Robin Hobb is handling the gender and like assault stuff. Like that, I really don't like it. There's a scene in particular on the ship that it's like a satisfying moment, but the way that is handled like by the other characters I really hate, and the way we're supposed to think of it I don't like. Like I recognize that the chain of command on a ship is incredibly important. I just wish that she had chosen to show that with like literally any other conflict than attempted rape. I really don't like that. I also really like Cyrilla as a character, so, and like her sections could be really, really rough. And I do feel like in her case, the trauma of what she has gone through is given more time and attention, which I appreciate. Also on the personal preference side, like I cannot stand Kenneth. I hate him. Like there are some parts of his storyline that are more interesting than he was in book 1, but I still don't like him. I still don't find him interesting. I wish that like he wasn't such a big part of this book. We spend so much time on him and I don't like him. I don't care about him. He is a really like reprehensible character in a lot of ways, and like I said, while there are some parts of him that are more complex than we initially thought, every time I thought we were maybe I don't know, going more in that direction, he would do or say something, especially the way that he thinks about women and talks about women, and I'd be like, oh no, you're still not a good one. So I don't know where we're going with him, but I don't have my hopes up for like a character arc for him. And then also as far as like the female characters, I just really don't like the way Hobb does her feminism. And I recognize these books were written like a couple decades ago, 1 or 2 decades ago. So even in that short time, a lot has changed. So I get that, but that was not what I was led to expect from these books. And I'm still fighting those preconceptions that I got from hearing people gush about these books for like all of the time I have been aware of BookTube. Like it's just really hard to overcome such a powerful impression, you know? So I'm still struggling with that. There's also a moment that I hate it so much, where Althea, she's interacting with the character who we find out some things about him later where I'm like, oh okay, you're also not great. But initially I liked him. He likes Althea and Althea doesn't return those feelings, and so she's really uncomfortable. She feels like he's about to kiss her. She doesn't know what she's gonna do, and then he doesn't, and she says something about it and he's like, oh, I wouldn't do that without your permission, like without your consent. And foolish little me is reading that and I'm like, I love that. Wow, what a sweet, considerate man. And as soon as that happens, Althea is like, ugh, I could never be with a man who asked permission to touch me. And I'm like, really? Like that's your deal breaker is consent? Like asking consent? I hate that. And I think it was especially, there's a couple of reasons why that especially bothered me, because if I were enjoying other parts of the book more, I think that would have been something where I'm like, wow, I don't like that, but okay, whatever, moving on. But because I wasn't enjoying other parts of the book, and because of some other circumstances, like the fact that it just so happens in the last couple weeks, I have read 3 very, very different books that all do consent so well. Darling by Kay Ancrum, A Single Thread of Moonlight by Laura Wood, and 12 Days of Fairy by W.R. Gingell. Each of those books has a scene where consent is like used or talked about, and they're all done in really like very different ways. They all feel like a really well integrated part of the plot. One of them is fantasy, so you clearly can do it in fantasy, and it was something that like did not feel awkward in the story. It like added to my enjoyment of the story and of the characters and of their relationship. And so it was really frustrating to read this book with the subtext of like, you couldn't do that and have it be romantic, because there are relationships where like there are ways to show that a relationship is healthy and consensual without explicitly like spelling something out. But for this book to have a scene where a female character explicitly says that she could never be with a man who asked consent, I don't like that. And I think especially in a series where there is so much violence against women, including sexual violence, I think it is not a good look. I really didn't like that. Like, those scenes are not like consecutive or anything, but in a series that has so much misogyny in it and so much violence against women, I think to have a scene like this where a character is like laughing at the idea of consent is really tacky at the very least. Just like very upsetting and poorly done. Also, I hear Robin Hobb praised for her character development a lot, and I don't know. I'm not seeing it yet. Like, I do like Malta a lot more at the end of the book than at the beginning, because that is what is supposed to happen. But even with her, it's like, I think we needed more development in the middle, because it was literally between point of view chapters that she had this huge change of heart. And like, yes, we did see little inklings of it, but she is a vastly different person between one chapter and the next, and there are reasons for that. But it's weird to me that Robin Hobb over-explains so many other things, and yet she doesn't give that time to Malta as like a character, like this time that she needed to develop believably as a character. Like, yeah, I'm glad she's better at the end, but it felt like it came out of nowhere. Like, it felt very forced to me personally. I know that other people don't agree. It's just hard to find characters to keep me motivated with this book, because like I said, I like Paragon and Amber, so I was really glad we got a lot with them. But like Wintro, I like as a character, but his storyline is incredibly frustrating. Althea is okay. Again, there's like the not like other girls thing, which is frustrating. I don't like the way that the gender and like attempted assault stuff is handled with her. I would like Rain, except for the fact that he is trying to marry a literal child. Like, she is at oldest 13 years old. And I think that's disgusting, and there is no reason why she has to be that young. We could have had exactly the same conflict and relationship, exactly the same character arc, and have her be maybe like 15 or 16. Like, there is truly no reason for her to have to be that young, and it just really bothers me. So anyway, I didn't hate this book. I know it sounds like I hated this book. I'm sorry. Like I said, I did give The Mad Ship 3.5 stars. I am curious, apprehensive, a little excited to see what happens in book 3. It's got to be better than Assassin's Quest. So there we go. Next, I finished Ancestor Approved, Intertribal Stories for Kids, edited by Cynthia Leinig-Smith. This is a collection of stories that all take place at the same powwow, featuring Native kids from a range of different backgrounds, including different Native American nations and First Nations from Canada. And I thought this was really lovely. Overall, I gave this book a 4.5 stars. I haven't done the actual like math that I often do with anthologies, but that's what this one feels like for me. And this is my favorite thing that I've read. Like, Rebecca Roanhorse's story in here is my favorite thing I've read from her so far. which I think it's Res Dog Rules is what it's called, but that was fantastic. I also really enjoyed Kim Rogers' poetry. She has a couple of poems in this. Secrets and Surprises by Tracy Sorrell was great. Indian Price by Eric Gansworth I really loved. What We Know About Glaciers by Christine Day was great. The Ballad of Maggie Wilson by Andrea L. Rogers I loved. That was the only story that like made me tear up a little bit, so of course it's a favorite. And then Bad Dog by Joseph Bruchac I also really enjoyed. Like, there were just a lot of really great stories here, and I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I did really well at reading the anthologies that I said I was going to read. Next, I finished the first book in the Jojo Macoons series. This is The Used to Be Best Friend by Dawn Quigley, illustrated by Tara Audibert, I think is her name. And I heard about this from Michelle's channel at Thor Wants Another Letter. This is a like early chapter book, I think, and I really liked this. We're following Jojo Macoons, who lives on an Ojibwe reservation, and yeah, it's just like about her life. It's called The Used to Be Best Friend because she feels like her friend Fern at school is maybe not wanting to be friends with her anymore, so it talks about that. Her home best friend is her cat Mimi, and this was just really like fun. I love how like bright and bubbly Jojo is. I love the way this book incorporates different aspects of her Ojibwe community and everything. I liked Mimi, although it always makes me nervous in a book where there's like a pet and like one of the characters, I don't know, like takes them somewhere or does something like in this one Jojo takes Mimi to school when she's not supposed to, and like that made me really nervous for her. But Mimi was okay. I think some of the humor was really fun as well. And I gave The Used to Be Best Friend 4 stars. Next, I finished A World Full of Poems by, I don't remember if they actually list an author. It's one of the, I think, DK publishing books. And this is a poetry book for children that is really intended to like introduce kids to poetry. And I thought this was really lovely. I think the design of this book is really cool and very attractive. And it's also broken up into different sections. I love that this book includes such a wide variety of poems for kids. Some of them, like a few classic ones, but a lot of like modern poets as well. I like the sections that it uses, and I really like the focus on like different experiences that kids might have. Like some of them are like really universal things like homework, and then some of them are very specific. Like we have a poem celebrating their adoption day and things like that, or what it's like being bilingual. I also really love that some of these poems, especially on like the like feelings section, some of these poems are ones that like basically they're saying to kids like sometimes you're going to be really unhappy or really angry, and that's okay, and you can just be upset and your feelings are okay. I just think that's really valuable, that it talks about like some of the messier emotional things that could happen or that will happen with kids and people in general. Also at the back of the book there is a section that's like activities, like a short section where like talking about kids who want to write their own poems or getting into reading more poetry. Like I just think this is really lovely. I think it hopefully would do its job, you know, about like introducing kids to poetry in a really accessible way. A lot of the poems are ones that would be, I think, really fun for kids to like act out or to say. There's a lot of like wordplay, a lot of rhyme, and a lot of like onomatopoeia and things like that. So yeah, I thought this was great. And I gave A World Full of Poems 4 stars. Next, I read a picture book, and that is This Book Is Not For You by Shannon Hale, illustrated by Tracy Subisak. And the reason I found out about this or came across this is because I read a recent article or opinion piece that Shannon Hale did for, was it like Publishers Weekly? I don't remember, but I will link it down below. It's fantastic. She basically is talking about the problem of like girl books and boy books and why she's still talking about it. I just love Shannon Hale. I admire her so much. So I will link that piece down below. It's very short. Please read it. But she also mentioned that she did a picture book with kind of that idea. And yeah, I thought this was wonderful. It's about a young boy who goes to a bookmobile one day and he wants to check out a book, but the person running the bookmobile doesn't want to give it to him because it has a girl main character and he's a boy. And from there it kind of turns into a just like, it just shows how ridiculous that is. Like he only wants to give the robot a book about robots, and a cat comes to check out a book and he only will give a book about a cat to the cat and things like that. I just think it does a great job of introducing this topic to kids in a really accessible and understandable way and in a really fun way. Like it makes it obvious what a silly concept that is. I also thought the way, like something happens in the middle of the book that I thought was really fun and a really clever and funny way to kind of bring us to the end, like to bring us to the conclusion we were supposed to draw. So I thought that was great. So yeah, I just thought this was a really fantastic picture book. I think it does a great job of accomplishing its goal, and I gave this book, It's Not For You, 5 stars. Next, I finished Dreamer's Pool by Juliet Merlier. This is the first book in the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy, and I was originally going to put this in a reading vlog, and I have not really had a lot of time for stuff like that, so I apologize that you're just hearing about it in a wrap-up, but I did read it like I was planning to. So this is the first book in a fantasy series, and we're following several different point of view characters. One of them is Blackthorn, and she is a healer. At the beginning of the book, she was in a lockup, and she was due to be executed when she is unexpectedly freed by one of the Fae, one of the fair folk, and on the conditions that she will go to this certain town and use her healing abilities, like her like wise woman, like herbalism and that kind of thing. That she will use her abilities for good, that she will help anyone who asks, and that she won't seek revenge on the clan leader who put her in prison and who has done other horrible things, that she won't seek revenge on him for 7 years. And she really doesn't want to do this. The revenge thing in particular, like putting off her revenge, she does not like that idea, but she doesn't really have a better option, so she eventually agrees. So we're following her. We're also following Grimm, who was also in lockup, and they escape together. And then our other point of view character is Prince Oren, and he has been corresponding with this lady Flede, I assume is how you say it, Fledace, I'm not sure, but he's been corresponding with her, and they were supposed to get married, and he really liked her. They really seemed to get along and to be in love with each other. This was looking like a much better marriage than he had hoped for. And then when she arrives, she is acting very different. She's not acting like the person that he knows and loves from the letters, and he doesn't really understand what's going on, but he feels like something, like, he thinks something is wrong, even though other people aren't really believing him. And so he ends up eventually asking Blackthorn to figure out what's going on. And because she has to say yes, she says yes. And that's what kind of brings the points of view together. And yeah, I ended up loving this book, but I wasn't at first. Like, the first chunk of this book is kind of slow. There's like a lot of setup that's happening. And also I found it, like, I wasn't really invested in Grimm and Blackthorn's point of view chapters. I feel like a lot of people would probably be annoyed by Oren. I really liked him, actually. So his was the point of view that I much preferred at the beginning of the book. I thought, as a character, I liked him. I thought he was really interesting, and I thought his story was interesting. Blackthorn and Grimm, it took me longer, and partly because Juliet Merlier deliberately doesn't tell you a lot of things about them or about their backstory until you get farther into the book. But it was just harder to connect to them or to get invested in their stories, or their point of view chapters. But then at about halfway through the book, something big happens where Blackthorn and Grimm both make the decision to go and help somebody who they think really needs it. And at that point, I was like fully on board for them as characters. Like, I started really liking them. I was like really, just like that decision really like attached me to them as characters, and from that point we started learning a lot more about both of them. Like, Blackthorn is like a very, very prickly character, and it makes sense why she is, but even knowing that it makes sense, it can still be hard to enjoy a character who is so like closed off, like even from the reader. And then on Grimm's side, he was so devoted to Blackthorn that it was hard to get invested in him too, because like we didn't really see why. So after we started getting more about them, after that big decision that they make, I started liking them a lot more as characters. And it's not until about halfway through the book, maybe even a little further, that Oren actually asks the two of them for help, which I think normally would feel a little frustrating, you know, that you know something in the premise of the book that doesn't happen for a long time. But I think because I ended up enjoying all of the characters so much, and I was enjoying like the writing and like the atmosphere and everything, like it actually didn't feel like it took too long. Although I did really end up enjoying like that mystery aspect, because some of it I had figured out, but some of it I didn't. And I just, yeah, like the plot of this one was super gripping, and you guys know I'm not usually a plot-focused reader, but I just found the story of this super compelling and really interesting. I think Juliet Merlier's ability to like write in a way that sets like the tone and the atmosphere and the setting so beautifully without over describing things, I think is really impressive. Like, I think there's like that's a hard thing for an author to do, in my opinion, and I think she does it really well. Like I said, I ended up enjoying these characters a lot. And then probably my favorite thing about this book is the way that it handled like violence against women, basically. Some parts of this book are quite hard to read for that reason, but I think that, like, unfortunately, if you read fantasy, it comes up a lot. I think even more than it should, but it is possible to do that well. And I think this is one of the books that has done that the best of any fantasy book I've ever read. It handled it with such care and such thoughtfulness. Like, this book really shows the lasting effects. And something that I love about this book is that even the like little instances are not written off and are not forgiven easily, are not brushed off as being nothing. Because like I don't think it's exaggerating to say that pretty much every other fantasy book I've read that has like sexism in it, which a lot of them do, even if they comment on it, I mean, it's like that comes up a lot in a lot of fantasy. There will almost always be that kind of like locker room talk, almost like the equivalent, that is supposed to like, I guess, set the tone and time period of the fantasy book for like historical accuracy reasons, which is ridiculous when you're talking about fantasy, but whatever. And it's like the main character will not join in with that because of course that would be bad, but like it's just treated as like not being a big deal, if that makes sense. And in this book that didn't happen. Like none of our main characters stood for it, and I loved that about them. I'm not sure I'm doing a great job of explaining that, but like it just really, I really appreciated that it was in big ways and small ways that this book really tackled that topic head on. So I thought this book was fantastic. This is one of the ones, I'll talk about another book where this happened, where I can point to specifically what bumped this up from a 4.5 stars to a 5 stars for me. And that was two things. One is that there is a like deception type plot line in this book that I almost never think is justified or handled well. I can think of maybe one other book that does it well, and I think this book actually did do that very well. And then the other thing is there's this one conversation that Blackthorn has with another character that I loved. Like I thought the way that was done, and it relates to the themes of the book, I just think that was fantastic. Like some of the specific things he says, some of them are very rarely shown in stories that deal with these topics, and then there's something he says that I'm not sure I've ever seen explicitly stated in a book that deals with this kind of thing, and I know I'm being vague, but I just think that whole conversation was done so well that it like really elevated the book for me as a whole. So I thought that was fantastic. Like this is probably one of my bigger surprises of the year, because I expected to like this, but I did not expect it to become my new favorite Juliet Marillier book. Yeah, but I loved it, and I gave Dreamer's Pool 5 stars. Next, I finished Lakelore by Anna Marie McLemore. This is a magical realism book following two non-binary teens, and as you can tell from the title and the cover, it deals a lot with a lake that they live near and how the lake's magic is kind of starting to creep out into their town, especially when these two characters like interact with each other or do certain things, and their names are Bastian and Laure. And yeah, Anna Marie McLemore is one of my favorite authors, so it is not a surprise that I loved this, but it is a surprise to me that I loved it as much as I did, just because the premise of this one, I don't know, it didn't pull me in quite as much as other books of theirs have, but I thought this was fantastic. I always love their writing. I think that, like The Mirror Season, this is one of their books that reads, in terms of writing style, I think it's much more like a contemporary. So if you've been put off by their flowery writing before, I would maybe consider trying this one or The Mirror Season, keeping in mind content warnings and everything. I loved these characters so much. I loved Laure and Bastian and their relationship, and seeing them both work through things with their gender identity and also with their neurodivergence. They're dealing with ADHD and dyslexia, and the way that those things are talked about is so like beautiful and so thoughtful, and the way that those connect to like the story itself, like the lake and how the lake functions, is just really beautiful. I loved the character relationships in this. Like both Bastian and Laure have really supportive and loving families, which I just thought was wonderful to see. I loved like the friend group we get here, and this is the other book where like I can tell you what bumped this from a 4.5 stars to a 5 stars, and that's pretty much like Antonio as a character. Like I said, I loved the like relationships and characters in general, but Antonio in particular, who is Bastian's older brother, I just love that man so much. Like he is just so kind and supportive, and like the way like the sibling relationship between him and Bastian is like so beautiful, and like it's so like against like toxic masculinity. It's so like about like understanding and loving each other for who they are, and it just like it makes me so happy. So like that was one of the things that really like bumped this book up for me, because there were two moments in this book that made me like actually like tear up. One of them was in the author's note and the other one was a scene with Antonio. Like, I just love him. So it's like special standout. But obviously I really loved this book and I gave Lakelore 5 stars, even though I don't feel like I did a great job of explaining this one or explaining why I loved it, but hopefully I got some of my points across. Next, I finished Girls Made of Snow and Glass by Melissa Bashardust, and this was a book that was chosen for me to read by my lovely friend Julia from Shakespeare and Such. And I'm so glad she did, because I have owned this book for a long time and I obviously was interested in it because I bought it. But I kept hearing, like, I remember a couple years ago, a lot of people were reading this and I remember pretty much only mediocre reviews. Like, the general impression I remember is that, like, it was well written, but people were bored or they didn't really enjoy it that much. But spoilers, I freaking loved this book. This is like my 3rd 5-star in a row. This is amazing. Actually, it's my 4th 5-star in a row. Yeah, so this is a Snow White retelling that focuses a lot on the relationship between the Snow White character and her stepmother, which is actually in this book a really close bond. So our 2 main characters are Lynette, who is the Snow White character, and Mina, who is her stepmother. And we follow both of them as perspective characters, and I love both of these women so much. I feel for them so much. I love their relationship with each other. I love that we get to see how, like, complex they are, and we see how much they struggle based on how they've been defined by other people. Because Lynette finds out that she was actually made out of snow, that, like, to resemble her mother exactly. Like, basically that she is a replica of her mother. That was created from magic, and she's always felt trapped by the expectations of her to live up to who her mother was, but after she finds this out, it is even more the case. And so we see her struggling with that, and then Mina finds out that her heart was replaced with one of glass by her father, who is a magician, and he tells her, like, that's why you can't love and that you're unworthy of love. And so she's, like, struggling with that. She believes that, you know, so Mina's obviously really upset by that, and she becomes determined to marry into the crown because she feels like that's the only way that she can get people to love her and care about her. And yeah, I just love this book so much. I love how complex these characters are, especially the 2 main women. I think as a retelling, this is such a smart book. Like, the way, I'm just so impressed at the way that Melissa Bashardust could, like she creates this particular setup and these characters for this version of the Snow White story. And then every time those characters would, like, make a decision or, like, something would happen in the story, it would make perfect sense for who they were, and it would also lead to another part of the fairy tale in, like, a way that is just so impressive to me. I also feel like this book does such a good job of, like, making you really understand Mina and Lynette and the difficult choices they have, and, like, there's so many parts of this book where it's like they don't have any good options, and so even though they do something where you're like, I think this is a bad idea, it's like you see why they do it, because they're doing the best they can. I love the things that this book says about women supporting each other and about, like, family and, like, the family you have versus the family you choose. The way that people are remembered, the way that people can, like, the idea of taking control of your own story. This book talks about, like, grief and courage and what courage can look like. And I also think the relationships are so complex and so interesting. Like, I've been gushing about Mina and Lynette's bond with each other, but also the connection they have with other people. Like, Lynette's father frustrates me a lot, but even he is somebody where, like, I understand him as a character. It's like, I don't really like him, but I understand why Mina and Lynette would both care about him. There's also a couple of romance subplots that I thought were lovely. Lynette's is a sapphic relationship with a character who I really liked, and I thought that was really interesting. And then I really liked the way that Mina's romance subplot was done. I think Felix as a character is so interesting. Like, I just loved pretty much everything about this book, which I did not expect to, although maybe I should have, because this really on paper sounds like something I should love, because it's a fairy tale retelling, focuses on female friendship and, like, women supporting women, and also a big element of it is, like, this idea of, like, personhood and like choice and everything, and, like, this, like, I know this happens in science fiction with a lot of, like, AI stories, but I really love in fantasy too, where, like, because of a fantasy thing, in this case, the way Lynette was created and Mina having a heart made of glass, this idea of, like, is this person a person? Are they capable of love? Like, obviously yes, but I love the way this book answers that question. I ended up loving this one just so much, so thank you, Julia, for finally making me read it. And I obviously gave Girls Made of Snow and Glass 5 stars. Next, I finished Tales from Shakespeare, the illustrated edition by Charles and Mary Lamb. After putting this on, I think, every TBR for All the Worlds a Page that we've done so far, I'm glad I finally read it. Also, this ended up being really perfect because earlier in the month, I had read the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, which I loved, and one of the authors they talk about a lot is Charles Lamb, and he was so interesting, and the way they talk about him and his stories, I was like, wow, I really want to read something by him, I think. And I saw a reference to the fact that he is probably best known for the book that he co-wrote with his sister, which was an adaptation of Shakespeare stories, and I'm like, I was like, I have a collection of Shakespeare stories that I was planning to read this month. Wouldn't it be interesting if that was the same book? And guess what? It was the same book. So I had already planned to read this, and it was just perfect that I read it in the same month as that other book. So anyway, this is written in 1800 something? When is it? Okay, so this collection was originally published in 1807, and it was like a collection of certain Shakespeare plays that were adapted as like stories or like fairy tales that you would read to kids. And it has never been out of print since then. This one is illustrated by Arthur Rackham, whom I love, so his illustrations were probably my favorite, W. Paget and Robert Anning Bell. And yeah, this was very interesting. I do think, like, the back of the book says that that Shakespeare's plays really lend themselves to this kind of fairy tale feeling, because their plots are filled with fantastical, almost fairy tale-like plot devices, misunderstandings involving identical twins, magical forests, ghosts and witches, and foolish kings that make them irresistible to almost any reader. So I do think that this kind of fairy tale lens almost makes a lot of sense for his plays, and I liked this. I think that both of them did a really good job of adapting Shakespeare's language from a play into a story. I think that was done really well. I have some questions about the way they selected plays for children. Like, I know this was a couple centuries ago, but like, honestly, the thing I think is even weirder than the fact that they include a lot of tragedies in here, because they kind of gloss over some of the violent aspects. Like, they tell you what happened, but they don't linger on it. But the thing I think is even weirder is that they include Measure for Measure in here, which is probably one of the plays I think would be least appropriate for young kids. Which, yeah, so interesting choice there. I also want to mention that there are quite a lot of its time elements, like on top of, you know, Shakespeare writing from his own time and like certain parts that definitely don't play very well for a modern reader. On top of that, Charles and Mary Lamb added some of their own stuff. I especially noticed this with Othello. Like, there was a lot of like racist language used that I don't think was from the original play. Like, I'm trying to remember from when I read Othello, and like the play obviously deals with racism among other things, but not like they like put it in the narration in a way that like you're supposed to agree with, which really didn't like that. And then also in The Merchant of Venice, I feel like they added like extra anti-Semitism. So do keep that in mind if you pick this up. But overall, I am glad I finally read it. Like I said, I liked the art. I thought they did a good job of adapting these stories. And there were some like moments of humor from the way that, like, some of it I think is intentional, but some of it is just because of the way that they like summarize things. Like, to read you the last paragraph of the King Lear story as an example. How the judgment of heaven overtook the bad Earl of Gloucester, whose treasons were discovered, and himself slain in single combat with his brother, the lawful earl, and how Goneril's husband, the Duke of Albany, who was innocent of the death of Cordelia, and had never encouraged his lady in her wicked proceedings against her father, ascended the throne of Britain after the death of Lear, is needless here to narrate. Lear and his 3 daughters being dead, whose adventures alone concern our story. Like, just some of the ways they would summarize things I think were really funny. And also, I think, which is probably expected for a children's story from this time period, I think some of the stories were very blunt about which characters you were supposed to like or dislike, whereas in the play, it's like you can kind of make up your own mind about some of the, I don't know, some of the characters' more questionable decisions. There's some characters who I think are very clearly good or bad, but then there's some where it's like, you can kind of decide if you think this is a basically good person who did a horrible, like, mistake, made a horrible choice, or if they're, like, actually a bad person or whatever. And finally, the last book I finished in the month of April was a reread of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I was a guest on Bronte Long. I will link that live show down below. As you can see, there's a lot of tabs. I have a lot of thoughts about this book. And yeah, like, I think it's funny because the first time I read it, I gave it 4 stars. The next time I read it, I gave it 3.5 stars. And now I'm back to 4 stars. This is just a book that always gets me in my feelings. I don't know if I need to summarize it, but just in case. So this is a Victorian classic. We are following actually several different main characters. There's like a couple of frame narratives, but like a big element of the story is the tragic love between Heathcliff and Catherine, and because they're both terrible people, the things that they inflict on themselves and on each other and on bystanders, because of this like great love that they have. And yeah, this is one of those books I've said before, anytime somebody talks about why they hate this book, I'm like, you are correct about everything, but I still like it. The writing is just so beautiful. Writing style is not something I weight over things like characters and story and all of that. But in this case, it kind of does, because Emily Bronte she writes these beautiful, beautiful lines about these really despicable people. And I think that's why, like, okay, personally, I don't think you're supposed to read this book like a romance. There are people who interpret it that way, but I don't think it's romanticizing the relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff. Like, there is a romance in it, but we are not supposed to romanticize it, if that makes sense. What was my original point? I think I was talking about the beautiful writing, and how, like, it makes these characters and these relationships, I think, more interesting than they would be otherwise. You know, like, he's more myself than I am, and like, I cannot live without my life, I cannot live without my soul. One of the ones that I think is the most effective and emotional and evocative is when Heathcliff says to Kathy, like, I can forgive my murderer, but yours, how could I? Like, I just think that the writing is just so beautiful and so emotional that even though the people saying these lines are often terrible, it still leaves an impression on me. Like, I still connect to that emotion. And also something that I think this book does well is, even though you're not supposed to like the main relationship, I think that the book does a great job of backing up that relationship. Like, I believe that Heathcliff and Kathy cared about each other enough to cause all this other crap to happen. Like, not saying that's a good thing, but I at least buy into it, because that's one of the things that I find really frustrating, is when a story sets up something as a great love that could have these like earth-shattering effects, and then it's like really underbaked, you know? And here that's not the case for me. Also, I think the ending of this is really beautiful and really hopeful, and I think in contrast to some of the really horrible stuff we have elsewhere in the book, like, I just think that the ultimate like feeling I get from this book is a lot more hopeful than you would maybe expect. And I think another reason this book just continues to work for me is that I do still feel some sympathy for these characters, at least a tiny bit. Like, even though many of them are horrible and they do horrible things to each other and themselves and innocent bystanders, they suffer so much that, like, I still feel at least a tiny moment of sympathy for them. Like Heathcliff is like a despicable person and I hate him, but there are a couple of moments where I grieve for him because of what he has lost. One of the feelings of grief I have for this book is, like, not because these people were you know, ruined by circumstance, because, like, they do bring this on themselves. The reason I think I feel a lot of grief is because it is such a waste, you know? Like these characters could have been happy, other people could have been happy, and it just, like, some of the sadness is from what happens in the story, but some of it is, like, from what could have been, you know? I don't think I'm coherently explaining this book, really, or my feelings on it. But yeah, I gave Wuthering Heights 4 stars. I understand why a lot of people hate it, but it just, like, it gets me in my emotions every single time I read it. And I also think there's a lot of really interesting things it says about things like gender and class, and like xenophobia and like being an outsider and everything. So yeah, I don't know, man. I just really enjoy this book. I'm sorry. Okay, everybody, so those were the rest of the books that I read in April. Thank you if you stuck it out to the end. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!